The stage is set, the tension is rising, and trainers across North America and the world are sharpening their skills and shuffling the cards like never before, as the prestigious 2024 Pokemon TCG North America International Championship is upon us, promising a weekend of electrifying competition, strategic brilliance, and the crowning of champions. From June 7th to 9th, the convention center in New Orleans will transform into a Pokemon paradise, buzzing with the energy of passionate trainers and the shuffling of thousands of cards at each table. We have now grown accustomed to the biggest tournaments having a set debut, as was the case for LAIC and Paradox Rift, EUIC and Temporal Forces, and this year's NAIC promises to be one to remember, with the debut of the Twilight Masquerade set and the formidable Dragapult TX. Even the 2024 World Championships in Hawaii will have a mini set of its own called Shrouded Fable, featuring the EX versions of the Loyal 3 and the mythical Pokemon Petulant. A brand new set brings a lot of questions, some easier to answer than others, but the biggest one is always, what deck should I play? So this tier list will be dissecting the hottest decks, analyzing the potential challengers, and exploring the factors that will determine who emerges victorious. In this video, we are going to try something different this time, and start from the bottom and work our way upwards to the creme de la creme. Now be advised that this list stems from my own testing, knowledge, and theory, so please bear that in mind when I inevitably roast your favorite deck. So starting off in the D tier, which is a casual but cool tier in this case, we have Goldengo EX, a deck that hasn't produced a consistent stream of big results and will probably remain a fringe deck in that regard, with only a second place at regionals and a special event win under its belt. Now, don't get me wrong, the possibility of utilizing different attackers like Origin Form Palkia V-Star and Radiant Greninja means it is not a linear deck overall, but it's very weak to hand disruption, and that is only to get worse now that we have on first stamp, so I don't have high expectations for this deck to be anything more than a fringe pick for the die-hard Goldengo fans. Next up we have Origin Form Dialga V-Star. This deck slowly crept up in popularity after a breakout performance at Indianapolis Regionals, and Dragapult TX will not stop this card from being good with the new set release thanks to the fact that we have access to 70 HP Beldems. However, one-hit KOing that very same Dragapult TX will not be an easy task, and thus the damage counters on the bench will definitely inevitably stack up to a point where it will be very hard to keep multiple Metang in play. Word of advice though, don't underestimate this deck's combat potential thanks to Start Chronos. Now, let's talk about the Festival Plaza archetype with Dipplin and Thwackey. This is a fun strategy, it's also very unique, but it is very susceptible to hand disruption plus counter stadium. And while most decks are playing only one or two counters, even just missing a turn means you have a low HP Pokemon doing 100 damage with a lot of useless bench sitters on the bench. This volatility means the deck can't really succeed at the highest level in my opinion, and I wasn't impressed with the few games I gave this a try. To top things off, the low HP Pokemon combined with a lower presence of Charizard EX means Grass type isn't even that big of a deal, so this deck will remain a cool but casual option for now. Moving on to a brand new deck though, we have Iron Thorns EX. This is a card that on its own looks very powerful. High HP, amazing ability shutting down other rulebox Pokemon, and even a good attack that synergizes well with future booster energy capsule. However, there's too many good non-rulebox Pokemon abilities that the deck doesn't feel good enough against. It needs to rely on cheap tricks like Crushing Hammer and random Aries to keep up, and Dragapult DX decks have no problem setting up and pushing through multiple Iron Thorns quickly. Another cool new deck is Greninja EX, and while it has used various different partners between Pidgeot EX and the new Frostless, it hasn't been able to establish itself as a real contender. The first attack is great and incredibly cost effective, but also very weak to Iono, and the second attack is limited by Manaphy. Not an easy hurdle to get through as it is played in pretty much all decks. That leaves us with a difficult to set up, underwhelming stage 2 with mediocre typing, and a glaring weakness to a top tier deck in Gardevoir EX. Not a great outlook for one of my favorite Pokemon. Finally, we have Ancient Pox, probably the deck with the biggest downfall due to the new set. But as usual, the culprit is Dragapult TX. The 6 damage counters will eventually add up too much on your Pokemon, where they will take a few extra prizes, taking away your advantage of being a one prize deck. And by the time you have ramped up your discard pile, it might be a little too late to close out a game. To make things worse, Charizard EX decks will likely still be near the top and played in healthy numbers, and there's decks that combine Dragapult EX with Charizard EX, making that Ancient Box's worst nightmare. As you might have noticed, I talked about Dragapult EX a lot, and that's because decks in this tier have a very hard time getting past it. Before Twilight Masquerade, the benchmark of the format was Charizard EX, and if your deck couldn't go toe to toe against it, you should reconsider. Now, the benchmark is Dragapult EX, and that leads us to the C tier. These decks look and feel great, and are a step above in power to those in the D tier, but have some glaring weaknesses against the more powerful and popular decks. First off, we have Future Box, which really makes Iron Hands EX be even more menacing than you ever thought possible. Between Miraidon, Iron Crown EX, Heavy Baton, and Electric Generator, the deck can stream a series of Iron Hands EX that are no longer held back by their low damage output. This quick high pressure is very powerful, but there is still the Charizard EX conundrum. While the deck can stand up to Dragapult EX since it can't KO an Iron Hands EX immediately, getting past Charizard EX decks is almost impossible. And while Charizard no longer holds the format's crown, it is still going to be played and will be a powerful foe nonetheless. Next up, we have Qianpao EX, one of the biggest losers of the new set for two reasons. Number 1, the 6 damage counters that Dragapult EX places threaten the good Frigibax and Bidoof, so we are forced to play the worst ones, and especially the 70 HP Frigibax is terrible due to the 2 retreat cost. Losing the natural bench protection of Bidoof's carefree countenance also hurts the deck, as Radiant Greninja is still a threat in Lost Box, and now Wellspring Ogre Pony X is present in Lugia V-Star. Don't get me wrong though, when this deck gets going, it's one of the best, but its best matchup, Charizard EX, is also losing a bit of ground, and thus it's harder for this deck to retain its place in the higher tier. And speaking of retaining its place, we have Arceus V-Star decks, which in my opinion have run their course. Once the deserving top deck in the format paired with Inteleon, it has fallen quite a few steps and feels like it is heavily outclassed by other V-Star Pokemon and most certainly by the EXs we have. Despite this, however, Arceus continues to produce results, albeit not in huge numbers, with a myriad of different partners. Armorish, Giratina V-Star, Alolan Vulpix V-Star, Hisuian Gudra V-Star, on its own, you name it. But Arceus has seen it all and done it all. However, its damage is lackluster, its ability, whilst powerful, is limited to once per game, and afterwards you have to rely on a constant stream of hand disruption to slow down other decks to your own pace. Regardless of what flavor you choose, the deck has very little margin for error since the first turn, and also very few tricks as the game progresses. With Lugia V-Star rising in the ranks with Twilight Masquerade, Dragapult EX, a tough nut to track, and Charizard EX and Gardevoir EX as powerful as ever, I find it hard to justify playing any Arceus V-Star variant in the upcoming metagame. And now we move on to a brand new deck showing up in this tier, which is Bliss EX with Munkidori. This combination is pretty unique, just like Bliss EX, and is honestly a ton of fun to use. Moving around the energy to use Munkidori's ability to heal damage from Bliss EX and continue attacking, replenishing your hand of resources every turn. The deck is really cool, and it even boasts high 100 HP chances that help mitigate any issue with Dragapult EX, as well as some funny lucky moments with its ability and the price card interaction. However, the damage output feels a little too low, and the attack doesn't prevent the deck from being Iona weak. This, coupled with decks that can 1-KO Bliss EX like Lugia V-Star, means I don't rank it very high as of the making of this video, but I know there are some very fervent Blissey leavers that will try to make their best to make it work. And finally, we have the likely most controversial choice of this tier, Snorlax. The deck gained an incredible new item card in Accompanying Flute, almost fully replacing Erika's Invitation, and a powerful tool card in Handheld Fan to mess with your opponent's energy, which was one of the few missing pieces for this deck. However, Charizard EX's drop in the ranks, as well as Lugia V-Star's rise, means this deck will have trouble keeping up. Giratina V-Star is also ever present, and thus this deck isn't as well positioned as it was in the prior format in my opinion. If you enjoy these sort of strategies though, Snorlax is still the deck for you. If you have enjoyed the video so far and found the information useful, please consider becoming a tablemon channel member through the join button down below. For as low as $1.99 a month, you can help support the creation of these videos. And thus, we arrive at the B tier, where these decks are inherently powerful and can go toe to toe against each other, as well as the decks in the tier above. They're not blown out of the water easily or have glaring weaknesses like the decks in the D and C tiers, and thus they are good picks that are probably not going to have such a spotlight shining on them as the ones in the A tier. After winning the last NA regional, along with powerful showings all throughout the Temporal Forces format since the rotation at EUIC, this deck will probably carry on being a powerful contender as it can change its tools to adapt to any deck in the format. Lugia V-Star is its biggest enemy at this point, but if Lucas Singh's win in Los Angeles is any indication, the deck can still go toe to toe against it. Well, it is the deck that I have played with the least, and PGs are extremely threatened by Dragapult DX and Wellspring Ogre Ponyx. This deck is at its best when it's the least respected, just like Snorlax, so I expect it will continue to have good placements in the hands of skilled players. Whether it's with Charizard EX, Clefairy EX, or even Wigglytuff EX, there is no shortage of options for this deck to adapt and counter any metagame. Next up is good old Giratina V-Star. Just like Arceus V-Star, Giratina V-Star seems like it is the backbone of the format. You can count on it being viable and powerful no matter what, as it has so many attackers and options at its disposal, making it extremely flexible for any situation you might encounter. This leads Giratina to be able to compete and remain viable with its huge repertoire of attacking options, both Lost Zone based and not. Cramorant, Sableye, and Radiant Greninja are all familiar faces to anyone who encounters the Lost Zone, and Giratina V-Star's Lost Impact and Star Requiem attacks are nothing to scoff at. However, it now has the inclusion of Iron Leaves EX to help against Charizard EX, as well as Blood Moon Ursa Luna EX from the new set. This new attacker is versatile, as it has colorless attacking cost and can help deal with bulky things, like an opponent's Iron Hands EX or early Miraidon EX, and thanks to its hefty 260 HP, almost as much as Giratina V-Star, it's not easy to take down. While the deck doesn't change much with new sets, and it's a pretty squared archetype, it still stands the test of time with each new set, and I fully expect it to remain a viable and powerful deck and to produce good results at NAIC. Gardevoir EX is the next one. It gains the very unique Adrenaline Power ability of Munkidori, allowing you to move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponents as long as it has a Dark Energy attached. This requirement is easy to fulfill, as you should very rarely have any problem dedicating your attachment for turn to it. This ability provides direct protection against the damage counters from Dragapult DX, and it also means you have access to bonus damage as well as healing. Drifloon is the biggest Pokemon to benefit, as now you reach over the 300 damage cap with a Drifloon and a Bravery Charm attached to it, covering both Charizard EX and Dragapult DX perfectly without needing a Hero Escape or a Luxurious Escape. However, Gardevoir EX now technically dealing 220 damage means it is a much bigger threat as well. Being able to reach higher damage thresholds with Bravery Charm means your A-Spec of choice can now be on first stamp to help disrupt much earlier than Iono, or perhaps Hyper Aroma, so you can establish triple Kirlia immediately on turn 2 off a single Arven. Whichever A-Spec you choose, between Munkidori, Cresselia, and Professor Turo scenario, the deck has enough coverage for Dragapult DX, as well as the raw strength of Drifloon and Screamtail as attackers to make this a top tier deck. Next we have Miraidon EX, which is having a resurgence in viability, and it really shouldn't surprise anyone at this point. An early Iron Hands EX is quite easy to pull off with a deck, applying immediate pressure to your opponent. And now with Tatsugiri on your bench with a rescue board, you have the dig available to reach boss's orders even if you're disrupted every other turn. This allows you to bypass big HP Pokemon in the active to pressure opponents' benches and close out games. With double Zapdos from Pokemon Go, you can make your Miraidon EX hit for 240 damage, which is perfect against Raging Bolt EX, and your Iron Hands EX now does 140 with Amp You Very Much, the perfect number to 1-KO any Pidgeot EX for weakness or other single price Pokemon like Roaring Moon. While the Charizard EX matchup is still extremely difficult, Dragapult EX is helping keep Charizard EX in check. There's a clear reduction in the presence of Charizard EX in the Twilight Masquerade metagame nowadays, and that can only benefit this deck. All of this, combined with the increased popularity and viability of Lugia V-Star, is the perfect storm for Miraidon EX to come right back to the metagame. And just like Giratina V-Star, Lost Box decks are incredibly adaptable and versatile, as they can play a wide array of attackers to cover different decks of the metagame. Whether it's newcomers or Angry V or Blood Moon Ursa Luna EX, or familiar faces like Roaring Moon EX and Iron Hands EX, This deck can go from a single price board to establishing the perfect Pokemon to counter whatever your opponent is doing out of the blue thanks to Mirage Gate. I rate this deck quite highly as because, while the Lost Zone engine feels a bit awkward at times, given the choices that are presented with Colress's Experiment or Flower Selecting, proper resource management and foresight into deciding what you will need to win a game makes this deck one primed for success in the right hands. This very skill-based deck has had continued success since its inception, and its adaptability will allow it to continue having success in the upcoming metagame. Now let's talk about Raging Bolt EX, which has been all the rage since Steel Mask Ogre Pony EX got released on this side of the world, as thanks to the energy acceleration of Teal Dance and the grass type coverage of Myriad Leaf Shower against its worst enemy Charizard EX bring the deck to a whole new power level. Bellowing Thunder is a very powerful attack. Being able to deal unlimited damage is always appealing, and the 70 damage multiplier is actually way better than even Chien-Pao EX's Hellblade attack, as with 4 energies for 280 or 5 for 350, you have pretty much the whole format covered. The deck is incredibly dependent on Professor Sada's vitality, which is not ideal, but between the Teal Dance ability, Squawkabilly EX, Pokegear 3.0, Trekking Shoes, and even concealed cards, finding them is actually much easier than it would seem. With Ogerpon providing extra energy and extra draw from the get-go, and 3 or 4 Earthen Vessel finding the right energy at the right time, this deck is dominating the online tournament scene in the lead up to NAIC. Another good thing going for this deck is that Dragapult DX discourages the use of single price Pokemon decks in general, which are often a pain for Raging Bolt DX as it has to work so hard to get the energy in play and then get rid of them. But if you're easily 1KOing a lot of 2-prisers, that's ideal and plays to Raging Bolt DX's strengths. As a pro tip, make sure you include a Cornerstone Mask Ogre Pony X to help deal with the pesky Mimikyus that otherwise bring the whole deck to a stop. And thus we arrive to the A tier, which are the 3 decks that I personally feel the strongest and have tested the most so far. Dragapult EX. There's a lot of discourse surrounding this card, and which partner is the best. I've personally found Xatu to be the best partner, with Pidgeot EX a close second. I generally think Charizard EX and Lost Zone also have their merits, but in my opinion, they're a step behind Xatu and Pidgeot. Xatu provides extra draw, and that coveted extra energy attachment is as simple as it's gonna get to power up multiple Dragapult EX, which I think is the key to this deck's success. Attacking with Dragapult EX as quickly as possible and as many times as possible to build up the damage counters and get extra prizes along the way is the key to this deck. However, it definitely feels more balanced than initially thought, and that is why Dragapult EX will not be as dominant as Charizard EX has been the past few months in the prior Temporal Forces format. Pidgeot EX is also a great partner, as it helps sustain the deck and provides resources needed at any point in the game. If you're able to have enough energy on board, Pidgeot EX is a fantastic partner and also makes Dragapult EX a powerful threat. I fully expect this deck to live up to its potential at NAIC, but it certainly won't dominate like Charizard EX did back at EUIC. And speaking of Charizard EX, it's still powerful and very much viable. Even though initially it seems like it will struggle against Dragapult EX, it is also a lot more balanced than I initially thought, and thus this deck will remain at the top. Adapting your deck to plug in any weakness to Dragapult is easy, with 70 HP Charmanders, Flare Veil Charmeleon, Professor Turo Scenario and Mist Energy, but losing out on Heat Tackle can be rough for some matchups. However, the rise of Lugia V-Star and Miraidon EX back to the top definitely means this deck will stick around, and this is why the metagame will be a lot more balanced than before. I expect Charizard EX to remain a top threat in the metagame, but with so many other viable decks and a wider metagame, it will finally lose the chokehold it had on the format up until now. And finally, the last deck. While Lugia V-Star can struggle with consistency sometimes, it's now a top contender in my opinion, on par with Charizard EX and Dragapult EX. The recent release of Legacy Energy and Carmine has seriously boosted the deck. Legacy Energy offers a ton of flexibility, as now you threaten the bench with Wellspring Ogre Pony EX and you can more efficiently deal with single price Pokemon with Iron Hands EX. Both of these attackers are facilitated by Legacy Energy, and that's not even touching upon the fact that Legacy Energy is also incredibly useful in every other Pokemon as it reduces the prizes taken by 1-1 KO'd by damage. Using this effect to offset the price trade for your opponent is going to be incredibly key in many games, and it's just another bonus to the Lugia V-Star arsenal at its disposal. Carmine is a real game changer for Lugia V-Star though, and should be a 3 or 4 of in every single list. I am genuinely in love with the card. There's a reason why you can't play supporters on turn 1, it feels broken, and with Carmine, now you can, whilst also helping your goal of discarding Archeops quickly. Lugia V-Star decks generally have it all: a single price attacker with the potential to knock out opponents in one hit, bench damage with Ogerpon, efficient damage with Ursaluna, and doesn't need boss to hunt down 2 prizes thanks to Iron Hands. To top it all off, it has access to 4 Jet Energy and powerful single price attackers to deal with control decks in a decisive manner. This should give you an overview of my personal opinion on the expected power for each of these decks, but in the hands of a skilled player, any of them can succeed. The incoming metagame I think will shift more towards a more even spread between all these viable decks, with no deck having a higher meta share than 15% in total, meaning there will be less room to play hard counters and you will need to rely on a powerful consistent deck that can adapt to many different situations and is solid all around. And that's it, trainers. You've seen the top contenders, the meta breakers, the decks that you'll have to counter at the top, and now it's your turn to grab your deck, choose your best fitting sleeves, and get ready for the last and biggest tournament of the year. I hope this video has been useful for you, and where do you think these decks should land in the tier list for Twilight Masquerade? Please let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, bye bye! If you want to support the channel, you can use code tablemon to get 5% off at Potent Store for your online codes, 10% off for your sealed product at Flipside Gaming, and 10% off on your aluminum accessories at TC Evolutions. Or if you're looking to buy singles or sleeves, you can fill up your cart and close the tab, then click on the affiliate link in the description and check out. That way you can support the channel over at TCG Player, Card Market, and Dragon Shield. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyperbeam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local C27 en el Centro Comercial Otay.